everyone. I'm Pete Knox, Senior Director of Research at the LifeRaft Group, and welcome to our next iteration of Conversations with the LRG. Today, we're going to talk with some long-term survivors who will share their stories, as well as some advice for how to not only live, but live well with GIST. But first, let me just explain a little bit about how we got here. So some of you who are listening may have actually participated in a long-term survivors survey. It came out of data from our patient registry. We've been collecting data for over 20 years, and we've learned a lot about patients. We've learned that some patients live a very long time with GIST and some unfortunately do not. And we've spent a lot of time trying to understand why that happens for some and not for others. Turns out that when it comes to data, you only learn about that which you collect. So we've collected everything about medication, dosages, side effect management, which physicians they went to, all of these things, and they're all extremely important and do impact on your GIST treatment journey. However, we started realizing that perhaps there was data that was off the page, as we say, that we weren't collecting, that we needed to learn more about. And the only way to do that was to reach out to patients directly and ask them those questions. So we conducted a survey a couple months back of long-term survivors that were members of our registry and had up-to-date records. And as the data came in, I personally noticed two things. One was that the stories were interesting, very interesting, and actually inspiring in many cases. And I thought to myself that while ultimately we'll probably publish a paper on this and write an article on it, this needs to get out to the patient population at large. They need to see this because part of what we do here is provide hope to patients. And a lot of these stories did just that. They provided hope. But also, I noticed that in addition to that, there was a lot of very good advice that was being given that patients at all points in their treatment journey could use, maybe help get themselves to a long-term survivor part, okay? So we decided to have a conversations with the LRG, which is what got us here today. And what we brought together are three individuals who are representative in their own ways of long-term survivors. Now, GIST patients are like fingerprints. Every one of them are unique and their treatment journeys are unique. And these three treatment journeys are also unique. There's some commonality in them as well. And we're thinking that perhaps each of you could learn something from these individuals and their unique stories. But I also think that there's some general information that patients at all steps in their journey can learn from. So let me just briefly introduce all three of our participants, and they're going to talk about themselves each time. And I'll do it in the order that they're going to present. So we have John Abrams. John, you are a dentist by training, and you're from Colorado, if I remember correctly, right?
That's correct.
Excellent. You'll be up first. And we have Dr. Mo Anderson, interestingly enough, also a dentist by training, a theme on this call. And way more than a dentist. You're going to want to hear Dr. Mo's story. She's a fascinating individual with I think we can still say infectious energy in this environment we're in, I'm pretty sure, but in terms of energy, infectious. And then many of you may already know Erin McBean. Erin is an SDH patient, which is a unique subset of GIST, as many of you know, and some of you on the call may even be SDH patients. And I will tell you that there is no human being on the planet I know of that is more knowledgeable about that subset. When I have questions, this is the lady I go to, okay?
Hey, everyone.
Yes, so you have an illustrious panel, and I'm just here to let them tell their stories. So John, we're going to start with you. If you could just kind of give us an idea, tell us a little bit about who you are, your brief history. I mentioned already that you're a dentist by training, which I have a feeling probably had some impact on your GIST treatment journey. And just tell us a little bit about how you got to this point in terms of GIST and anything else you'd like to add.
Okay. So you want to hear my story, basically, my journey. Okay. Well, for me, it started in 1997. I consider that the start date, although I had symptoms looking retrospectively probably 12 months before. I had my physician, my brother is an internist, and at the time I was seeing his partner. He was in my chair getting his teeth cleaned. I was telling him about my symptoms. And he goes, John, I want you to meet me in the emergency room tomorrow morning at 6:30. So I go in, they do an endoscope. They look at it and say, well, you have something on your stomach. Looks benign. That'll come back in several scenarios for me. And so my brother arranged for a general surgeon to actually operate on me 5 o'clock that evening. I stayed in the hospital from 6:30 in the morning. 5 o'clock, they operated on me from 5 till about 11 at night. So we did that, of course, had the biopsy. And if you look at the pathology report, GIST actually existed back then. My pathology report says leiomyosarcoma, parentheses, gastrointestinal stromal tumor.
Common theme.
But but it was all under the subset of a sarcoma. Mm-hmm. So we weren't sure what to do. We called all the cancer centers in the country. My oncologist talked to Dr. George at Dana-Farber. Some of them said, you've done surgery, that's all you need to do, it's a sarcoma. Others said, do chemotherapy. My oncologist is fairly aggressive, and I'm fairly aggressive on my own body. So I did 4 months of traditional chemotherapy, which today you just wouldn't do. There's no indication for that at all. When that was all done, he wanted to look inside. So they opened me up again, looked in. And the reason they did that is that the tumor was attached to my diaphragm. So we kind of assumed some sort of metastasis, but we didn't know. Opened me up, looked fine, turned to my oncologist. I said, well, I guess the chemo worked. He goes, I don't know, we'll never know. That felt a little weird, but that's what it was. He's a very honest guy. Sort of quickly on my history, 4 years later, I had prostate cancer. I had that completely removed. 2 years after that, I had a gallbladder attack. I just chose to have my gallbladder removed. And when they were removing the gallbladder, they saw an inflamed lymph node. So they biopsied that, and it had GIST cells in the lymph node. So that was 2003, and I've been on Gleevec ever since. The interesting part of that story was a year or so before, I got a bill from a pathologist. I had no idea what it was for. My oncologist had become familiar with Gleevec, and without telling me, had them recheck my slides to see if indeed I had GIST, that Gleevec might work for me. Really weird. So I started on Gleevec in 2003, have been on it ever since. In 2004, I had another rare cancer, a very rare non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Normal treatment for that would be what they call CHOP, which is a chemotherapy. But because I had chemo in '97 with a very harsh chemical that's bad for your heart, we couldn't do that. So I did 20 sessions of radiation. So that's sort of my cancer history.
So a couple things there. One, the fact that you've had multiple cancers is actually something that happens fairly frequently with GIST patients as well. So that's important for you to mention it. The other thing I remember about your story, John, that was interesting is you mentioned all this. So 1997, which was a while ago, 2003, whatever. But at that point, you're not at the LifeRaft group yet, correct? You came much later in your treatment journey.
That's correct. When I first went through my cancers, I have a tremendous support group. My brother is a very well-respected physician. My wife and family have been incredibly supportive. And I didn't think I needed any more than that. I knew about some different support groups. I actually talked to my wife about that a little bit this morning. And at the time, she said the main thing for me was that my cancers never defined me. They never have. They're not who I am. They're just part of the whole package. And so she kind of reminded me of that this morning. Fast forward till about 5 years ago, maybe a little less. So my oncologist, I've had a lot of the side effects that everybody's had, fatigue, cramps, blah, blah, blah. And he said, there's a new GIST specialist at the university. Why don't you go see him? So I went over there, saw Dr. Villalobos at the University of Colorado. I'm not sure if he's still there now. Braylon Wilkie is there. And in about 5 minutes, he told me that I was Gleevec for life. And he also told me about LifeRaft. And I said, at this point, I think it's time to give something back. Maybe I have a story to tell that people will find interesting, whatever. So I got involved with Life Raft. I'm the state rep for Colorado. I can tell you that as much as I didn't need it, the people that I've met at Life Raft have only enhanced my life. I went to a GIST Day of Learning in Portland. I think I found the most loving, giving, altruistic people I've ever met in my life. I only look forward to being able to go to a Life Fest, put a lot more names with faces, and I encourage people to use Life Raft for everything they have to offer, including their mentors. It's just an incredible organization.
Thank you for saying that. It's funny, John, you kind of coined something around the office when we were talking about these different things. We were going through a campaign that's, that it's about hope. And when we talked about your story, what I said is hope doesn't have an expiration date, because you came to the Life Raft group later and there still was a benefit. And you can hear in your voice that it actually did have a benefit. So I'm glad to hear that. You kind of touched already on some of the factors that contributed to your long-term survivorship. Is there anything else beyond your family and, luckily for us, the Life Raft group, was there anything else you wanted to mention?
Again, I bounce everything off my wife. I asked her this morning, give me an adjective or something, about that would describe my journey. And the first word that came out of her mouth was attitude. And I don't know if I was born with rose-colored glasses or my parents instilled in me not to feel sorry for yourself. I remember somebody once asked me, do you ever ask why me? And my immediate answer to that was, why not me? I mean, why am I so special that I wouldn't get something? I tell people after they've gone through something, get back to what you enjoy doing the most in your life as soon as you can. If you're a computer nerd, get back on the computer. If you're an athlete, like I've been, or a coach, I finished 4 months of chemo. I coached in a soccer tournament. I could hardly stand up. A buddy of mine asked me to play golf one day right after chemo. My wife said, you can't do that. I said, yeah, I can. I'm not going to die from being tired. I said, so I played 9 holes of golf. I don't remember a thing. And I came home and I slept. And so it's just about finding things that make you happy. I had to retire early because of the severe tetany-like cramps in my hands. So I was much too young to retire. And I told my brother and I told my wife, if I want to sit on the couch for 6 months, don't bug me. And I found 2 new jobs within 6 days. I flip houses with my son, and I'm a consultant for some young dentists to help their practice. I'm still busy athletically. I play golf all the time. I box with a trainer. I just had knee surgery, so I'm hoping to get back on the tennis court. And, the only thing that I say that I wrote before is I guess my motto would be, keep living life to the best of your altered ability. And I consider myself, and always have, one of the luckiest unlucky guys I know. And I can live with that.
That sounds to me like advice to a newly diagnosed or otherwise patient. Exactly. But is there anything else you want to add on that last point for time? If here you are, you could go back in time and talk to yourself, 20 odd years ago, or a newly diagnosed patient. Anything else you would add? I mean, they should just listen to what you said for the last 10 minutes. That's a pretty good first start, I would say.
You know what? I think the only thing along my journey that Life Raft actually had influence on, people would say, oh, you're a cancer survivor. And I would always say, no, not until I die from something else. I have a ton of heart disease in my family, and that's what I always expected until people talked about this subject on live chat. And people said, no, people felt the same way. And then they said, no, the real definition is, if you've survived something that other people don't necessarily survive, makes you a survivor. So I accept that. I accept that label at this point in time.
Your attitude determines your altitude, for sure. That's definitely it. Dr. Mo, you have an interesting story, to say the least. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and who Dr. Mo is. And also, if you could, tell us about your GIST treatment journey and up to this point.
Happy to do so. Pete, thank you. And John, thank you for sharing your inspiring story. You're further down the road than I am on this journey. And it encourages me to be in forums like this and hear from long-term survivors. I am a dentist, doctor of dental surgery. I'm no longer in clinical practice. I'm in benefits administration. So that's why all the monitors here next to me, I turned away and I'll be back at that in a moment. But I enjoy it because I still get to participate in healthcare and influencing populations in a positive way with healthcare providers, as you know, tend to be nurturers. And that's been to my advantage in this journey and in my natural compassion and wanting to give to others, which keeps me from indwelling on what can be a challenging road. I'm a motivational speaker, which means I'm a professional optimist. And even with that having been said, there are days, there are times when, I get down, and it's been wonderful to have a supportive network of family, my family of faith, my family of origin, my kids. It's so important to have supportive people around you. One of the first things I learned to do was remove toxic people and toxic situations from my life, for my own benefit, for my own survival. Some people I have to love from a distance. In 2012, I became ill, had just started a new job, went out to dinner to celebrate, and got food poisoning, which was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And that I ended up in ER a few days later, and they did a scan, which I didn't want. I thought, hey, I just need an IV. I need some rest. I want to get out of here. You guys are just ordering tests for no reason. And as it turned out, they discovered the mass, and I just had a physical. There were no physiological symptoms going on. My blood work had come back well. I had the upper part of me and the lower part of me scanned, and everything was great, but there was a tumor 9 centimeters on my stomach. And so I was in a place where they did not have any just specialists, but they had a very good radiologist who did a differential diagnosis right there in ER. I looked back at it from 2012, and that was what it said: gastrointestinal stromal tumor. All I remember, Pete, is the emergency room physician coming back and looking kind of stricken. Even though I didn't know the person, I knew something bad was getting ready to come out. And when I was told there was a mass, that they would treat the food poisoning, but there was a mass, and they wanted me to have surgery the next day. And didn't have any internal bleeding. And it had probably been there, like John, in retrospect, I'd had some IBS and different things going on with my body that in retrospect I realized was probably related to that tumor. But they went in, I was like, no, hold up. And that's what I would say to people newly diagnosed, is that if it's not an emergency and you need time to just quell the voices screaming in your head, time to get your affairs together, time to talk with your family, then take that time. A couple of more days is not going to make any difference, assuming that it's not an emergency situation. And I needed that. I needed my family there. I needed to let my job know. I just needed to feel like I had control over something, because all of a sudden my world was shifted 180 degrees. They did the surgery and did a partial gastrectomy, and I thought I was great, not realizing that you don't know what you don't know. Didn't realize I wasn't dealing with a GIST specialist. Found out later the oncologist had only had one patient with GIST in his entire practice, and they did quite a few things that shouldn't have taken place. But that's how I ended up with the LifeRef group, because I was told 6 weeks later, when I went back for my follow-up, that the gist had spread, had metastasized to my liver, and that there were tumors everywhere. And prior to that point, I hadn't really been my own advocate. I was still just, even with a background in healthcare, this was just so unknown, and I was so afraid. And I ended up, long story short, I started doing research. That's how I found the Life Raft group. And I ended up at MD Anderson, where I worked with a GIST specialist. But 18 months later, they saw signs of recurrence. And I was devastated that I was on. They put me on Sutin, Stivarga, Tasigna. I was in ER more than more than I was at my primary care physician, with hypertension and rashes and gastroenteritis. It was very difficult, but eventually they did surgery again, a much more aggressive surgery at MD Anderson and at UT Southwestern. And they removed my stomach, completely removed my stomach, my spleen, part of my pancreas. I have to write it down. I used to be able to just rattle this off to anyone who would listen. Liver resection, adrenal gland. And so when I tell people I don't have a stomach for that, I mean it. Wow. It's just, I woke up, it was near my diaphragm. There were so many things they told me as I went into that surgery. And when I woke up, first, I wanted to make sure my mom was nearby so I could lock eyes with her. And then I wanted to know, did I have had they gone into my diaphragm colostomy bag? And they assured me that they didn't have to. And I went back to sleep and felt void. And ever since then, I guess that's what drives me, is that I just believe that I don't dwell on what I can't do, but what I cannot do, but what I can do. And I've been on Gleevec since then, since 2012.
Amazing. And that kind of is what contributes to your long-term survivorship. Just so people know, because you're talking about MD Anderson and UT Southwest, you're in Dallas, Fort Worth, right?
Right. I moved. I was in Austin when I was diagnosed. I should thank you for clarifying that. And MD Anderson was the closest there in Houston. So I would make that drive back and forth for my appointments. And when I moved back to Dallas, Fort Worth, I wanted to change, and Life Raft was very instrumental in that. I did get mutational testing. The Mayo Clinic, they did do that right in Austin. They sent it to Mayo Clinic, and I found out about that I had an exon 11, high mitotic rate. And that information was useful to me in that, for example, I don't really want to go every 3 months to, get scans and to get exams, but with understanding the physiology of the type of tumors that I had and the type of mutations, then, it helps me to accept the things that I cannot change, realizing the risk associated with that high mitotic rate, the risk of recurrence. So it's worth it to follow the advice is given, but it helps me to know it's not just random. I like data-based, evidence-based information.
So do we. It's a common theme we hear, but a GIST expert matters. Mutational testing matters. Often those two things are related, not always. If you go to a GIST expert, you're more likely to have mutational testing. I mean, as Dr. Mo's alluding to, where you live in the country matters sometimes, unfortunately. I mean, Texas is a big place, but there were multiple places she could go. Not everyone is lucky enough to have a GIST expert nearby, but if you can, even if you can't go directly to one of those centers. One of the positives of the pandemic situation we're dealing with now is the rise in telemedicine. So if you do live somewhere in the middle of beautiful Montana or in the Dakotas or somewhere else, and you can't get to Portland, or you can't get to the Mayo, or you can't get or to Chicago, maybe they can come to you with telemedicine. So that's a positive. You kind of alluded to when you were talking there, Dr. Mo, about some of the factors that contributed to your long-term survivorship. And even you kind of gave, if people were listening, you gave some advice to both newly diagnosed and other patients. But do you want to expound upon those two things in a minute or two?
My advice would be for my long-term survival, what I know for a fact has contributed to me is my faith. And I'm not telling anybody what to believe in, but I know that it has helped me to believe that there's a larger hand at work here. And that for me, I believe God does not waste wounds which motivates me to want to go out and share with others about my journey. Hobbies, John talked about this. I have to have something fun planned. When I initially got diagnosed, I was just sitting up, morose, upset with people. I remember being angry with my family for eating ice cream in July after I had my gastrectomy, and I took it personally. How dare you eat ice cream in front of me? That is just so rude. And it was a lot of dwelling on, I can't eat cheese anymore. I can't have Italian. I can't have creme brulee. I just, I spent some time on that, professional optimist and all, until I made myself consciously flip the switch. I mean, I shouldn't be punishing them for something that has occurred to me. We all have things we have to bear. But when I feel myself going down that direction, for example, with the severe lactose intolerance, when I started looking at what can I do, how can I fix this, I learned that there are like a dozen cheeses that are naturally lactose free. And I've helped people who haven't lost their stomach with that. I share information like that. So hobbies, I have to have something on my calendar to look forward to. I help others whenever I can with organizations that I'm in, neighbors, particularly when I feel myself getting in some dark places. Like last year was tough for everyone on top of having a chronic illness. And I would just reach out to people. Not so much trying to find people with something worse going on than me, but people who, needed help in an area where I still have a strength. I have a lot of strengths and I can share those with others, and it gives me energy. And just, remember that the people around you are your support network. You want to be as optimistic and strong for them as you can. It's easy to kind of take it out on the people around you, the people helping you, but we don't want to add to their burden, to their journey, to whatever they're dealing with. So I want my family to forget what I cannot.
Awesome. So just to point out, two folks who are both medical professionals who both basically said, hey guys, sometimes this is hard. So if you're sitting out there and you're not, whether you are a medical professional or you're not, and you're going, sometimes this is hard. These are people who, as Dr. Mo said, kind of do healthcare for a living, and it was still hard. So don't beat yourself up over the fact that it's hard. And you said it yourself, Dr. Mo, you're a professional optimist. I agree. And even you get down sometimes. So it's okay. It's not about, what happens to you. It's about what you do to handle it going forward. So that's very important. And speaking about someone who has definitely handled it both backwards, forwards, and sideways, Erin McBean. A bunch of folks on the call here probably know you already, Erin, but you are an SDH patient, succinate dehydrogenase. For those of you who don't know, it's a tumor suppressor gene, often associated with wild type patients, but not always, okay? And we learn more about SDH every day, it seems. It can affect anyone, but it tends to predominantly affect younger people. And more females than males, while normal GIST or standard non-SDH GIST doesn't really have that dichotomy. So it's really a unique form of the disease. It's almost like a separate disease in itself, So Erin, I want you to tell your story because it's a really interesting one, but in particular, you could focus a little bit on what it's like to be diagnosed as a younger person and all of those unique challenges that you faced, then and now.
Thank you for having me here first. It's great hearing everybody's story, and I love seeing how many more long-term survivors have come throughout the year or the years. Before it used to be just a small pool, and now it seems to be growing more and more. So there's a lot of hope to be had just because of how advanced science has gotten. So it's amazing. So back in July of 1999, I was just turned 16. I'm thinking, hey, my summer's gonna be great, going into upperclassmen of high school. I started to feel sick. And then 2 days later, I was crawling to get to the bathroom, and my dad looked over and he's like, why are you crawling? And I'm like, I was so dizzy and my heart was racing so much. And he's like, we need to get you to the hospital. And this isn't normal. That's not normal. So we went to All Children's Hospital, where they, of course, ran some tests, and I was extremely low on blood. And I had really, really high blood pressure, and those aren't supposed to mix. And so I was a question from the very beginning. So they ran a whole bunch of tests, and my adrenaline levels came back 500 times the normal max. It was extremely high. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but it gave me one diagnosis right off the bat. And couple weeks later, after I got a blood infusion and a whole bunch of blood pressure medication dumped into me, they came back to me and said, hey, you need to come in. We have some news for you. And that's when they dropped the word pheochromocytoma on my plate as a 16-year-old. And I'm like, what's that? You know, a pheo, what? You know? And I remember sitting on the bed and the doctor said, well, it's a tumor, and everything shut off at that point. I stopped listening because tumor meant cancer, death. I only have a couple of months to live, thinking chemo, losing hair, all those things. And so it took a while for that to process on what they were trying to say. I actually went home and my mom had to reiterate what the doctor was talking about. And so back then there wasn't a whole lot of information out there about it. So they were like, well, we don't know why you're losing blood, but we're gonna worry about the blood pressure, the thing that's causing the blood pressure and the high heart rate, because that's really dangerous. So for the first year, I had to keep going back into the hospital for blood transfusions because I kept losing the blood. And then they're like, well, we can't find this tumor. I was going after scan after scan. And finally, July of 2000, they're like, well, your left adrenal gland is slightly larger than your right. We're going to take that out. So I'm like, okay. At 17, there's my first surgery. I wake up and my blood pressure's still high. My heart rate's still high. Blood's still low. And I got a whole bunch more medications thrown at me and sent home. So continuing on for a whole nother year, I just kept going back to the hospital every month to get blood transfusions and trying just to get through high school and survive. They did start to focus on the blood loss because that was starting to become a thing. And then they, on the fourth time of doing an endoscopy, they turned the scope up to see right where the esophagus and the stomach meet. And then they saw a tumor, or an ulcerated tumor, eating into the stomach lining. And that's what was causing the internal bleeding. So July of the following year, 2001, I got scheduled for a partial gastrectomy where they removed 1/3 of my stomach. It was clear margins. I woke up, still had high blood pressure, but at least I wasn't losing blood anymore, which helps a little bit. And they didn't give me a name to the tumor at that time. They're like, well, if I got a cancer card, this is the one I would want. It's extremely low mitotic rate. You're going to be fine. This was probably there all your life. Go about your business. And at that time, I was graduating high school and getting ready to go off to college. So that was the end of my all children's type experience. And they said, you're going to be going out of state, or not out of state, out of city, go find a new doctor over there that's geared for adults, and good luck. And I was just living off of blood pressure medications at that point.
And this point, you're like 18?
18, yeah.
Let me just point out, Erin, for everyone who's listening, you may be on a phone, you may be on Facebook, you may be wherever, but wherever you are, there's a Q&A feature here somewhere on one of those. So if you have questions for any of these panelists or for me or anyone else, just feel free to type them in. But so you're 18 at this point. This is a lot for anyone to take, but for an 18-year-old who's just trying to get through college, this is quite a bit.
Yeah. I was in performing arts at the same time, and I was principal chair flute player. So I needed lung capacity. I needed to be able to play, and it's a very competitive section. And that kind of stopped that dream of being into that. So it was a whole shift of, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go? So college, the first year, it was more of trying to find myself again. But in a way, I was really happy. I am really happy that I got it when I did, because I hadn't put time and effort into a path already. I was still right at the beginning of figuring out my paths to take in life. So I didn't lose anything. It just redirected where I wanted to go. And I'm very thankful for that opportunity, because it opened my eyes up and like, things can change. And so facing all these different health issues, it just helped me keep going forward. It's just, you learn to go with the flow.
That's a common theme we see.
Yeah.
I mean, and let me just add, John, you mentioned in your story that, at that time when you were diagnosed in the late 90s, you were misdiagnosed as LMS, okay, which was a very common thing back then. We didn't know much about GIST. That not knowing much about the disease has continued on until fairly recently with SDH, which is what Erin has. So when she was diagnosed, they knew less than nothing. about this. So part of it, you're all listening to this and going, these doctors are idiots. No, a lot of it is they really didn't know, okay? Because we knew even less. And I've been with the Life Ref group 10 years. And in those 10 years, not that we know everything, but a lot has changed with SDH, even more so than with standard GIST. So when you were getting it, it was a different time than if a patient gets it today, I think is important to mention.
Exactly. And it was a big shift in the from 2001 on. That's when really SDH was a thing, and they figured out that gene, and then they figured out it was 5 different subtypes, and then the epigenetics of it all. It gets really complex and crazy, but it took a while. But the amount of information that they've learned in just this amount of time has been exponential compared to previous illnesses, where it's taken 20 years to figure out one thing that's only been 10 years, and they figured out a lot of different things. So science is catching up, and it's increasing exponentially. So I have a lot of faith in that. It's really neat to watch. Back to story of time. I went to college, met my boyfriend there, and we moved up to Minnesota. I was in Florida at that time, so we moved up to Minnesota, my old hometown, and brought him up there where my family was. Got married, and then in 2007 I got pregnant, and so that started a whole roller coaster. I didn't think I was going to be able to, and I wasn't thinking about it, and it just happened. So all of a sudden, danger zone. I'm still on those blood pressure medications, still dealing with FEO symptoms and everything like that. So I went to an endocrinologist up in Minnesota, and they're like, "Why are you seeing me? You need to go to a specialist." And they threw me at the Mayo Clinic. Luckily, it's a house of Rochester, Minnesota is a house of Mayo Clinic. So I met my first real endocrinologist that knew what he was doing. And he's like, "Well, looking at your history, you had GIST." And that was the very first time I heard that term. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's a completely different, tumor. Because I thought it was the one that I had on my stomach was a spawn off of this FEO thing. And they didn't explain it to me when I was younger. But now I'm getting a little bit older, and I'm questioning things, I'm looking things up. And then I'm like, okay. So around that time, I was just trying to focus on getting through the pregnancy. So I didn't devote a lot into diving in. I'm like, I'm going to put that off to the side. I'll learn about it later. Let's get through the pregnancy. But when he dropped the word GIST, he told me about this other illness called Carney's triad. And he goes, if you have this, you're pretty much likely to have Carney's triad or Carney's stratitis at that time. So it's the dyad, which is 2 of the types of cancers. So
really quickly, because the rest we're all going So there's 3 diseases in play here. There's GIST, there's para and FEO, and you can do a much better job of this than me. But the reality is, if you have all 3 of them, you have the triad. If you have 2 of them, you have a dyad. And you managed to get the royal flush there. You had all 3, right?
Yeah, I have all 3. Plus, they're trying to change the things are changing. They're trying to change the triad into a pentad, which is 5. I have 4 of the 5, but we'll get to that if we get to that. Otherwise, there's no big deal. But after the baby was born, we went into a really high-depth nuclear scan, and they showed a tumor on my heart, and that identified it as the FEO, which changes names when it's off the adrenal gland to paraganglioma. Not to even confuse you guys even more, but had a functioning paraganglia on my heart. And so they went in 6 months after I had my baby, and I had open heart surgery at the age of 25. As soon as that tumor was taken off and I recovered from that, it was like a whole new world opened up to me. I wasn't on those blood pressure medications anymore. The side effects of having all that adrenaline in my body were gone. And then I could really, really just focus on everything else. So I started to dive into research and helping other people, getting the stories out there. Everybody I came across, even my eye doctors, I was telling them my story, and they were so interested in it. But it was just the fact that nobody really knew about this weird, disease. And I wanted people to know because it might happen to somebody else down the line that they run across. So getting my story out was a big thing. And that's when I started to find all of these organizations, and Life Ref Group was the GIST one that I signed up for right away. And there was another organization that, I had a whole screen full of organizations because I became a full-time patient advocate pretty much at that point in time. So my life was just kind of centered around that. And then I think July of 2011, everything happens in July for me, which is great and bad because I hate July, but I know it's easy for me to keep track of. So July of 2011, I went back into the doctor for just a routine scan, and they said, well, look at that. You have a tumor in your lung. And that's when I knew, because of the way it's formed, it's calcified and everything. They're like, well, that's the pulmonary chondroma tumor number 3 of Carney triad. So I was one of about 35 people in the world to have the complete Carney triads, all 3 cancers at that time. The number's gone up a little bit since then. But longevity, these tumors, they don't react to medications. Gleevec doesn't work for us. Any other types of chemo, it just doesn't work. Our tumors are very slow to grow. They're resilient, but once they start to spread, there's nothing really out there other than surgery at this time for it. So staying on top of your scans and staying vigilant and getting it while they're small before they spread too much is the key for now, until we find other medications for us to try and use. So I think that's helped me live longer, is to know that don't go on these chemo medications. That's just going to hurt my natural response to fight this. And then stay as healthy as possible by, eating right and working out if you can. It's just what it is.
Exactly. I mean, we have a question, which I'll get to in a minute, but in your case, like when you're talking about all these medications, they're at this point, not to make this more complicated, but with the exception of the epi mutant that has methylation, there are no medications really for SDH patients. Okay. So on one hand, you're going, hey, it's great. You don't have side effects from medications. Again, there are no medications that help. So what you're doing is you're dealing with this choice. Do you take medications and maybe have a handful of surgeries? Or do you not take medications and maybe have more surgeries? And that's what's going on here. So there's pluses and minuses to all of these, but really the reality is there's no choice because there's no medications. So it's a little bit of a different situation in terms of advice. But if you had to, there were so many factors, and when it happened for you, you were younger, but if you had to point to 1 or 2 that are really contributing to your long-term survivorship, what would you single out, Erin?
A lot of it has, for me, I think, is genetics. The tumor acts differently. So SDH has a different way of forming. It has a different way of spreading. So a lot of it, I got the lucky role, but not the so lucky role because I have other things to do. It's a balance, right? And then I think just outlook on life, staying on top of everything. And then still, I have a saying that says, don't wait for the storm to pass, learn to dance in the rain. That's me. And living in Seattle now, dancing in the rain. Come on, it's always so. I'm always out there and having fun. So you find, like you said, you find things that you love and enjoy, and you do them when you can. And when you're not, you accept it. You get better. You take your rest that you need, and then you get up the next day and you try. And that's really the main thing is.
Another thing to point out, like Erin had mentioned, that we use the term indolent a lot, slow-growing form of the disease. And we always used to say that was the case with SDH. Unfortunately, what we're finding out is it's not always the case. There are some patients, I'm just saying this for anyone who's out there, who do not have, their form of disease is more aggressive. We don't at this point yet know why some patients are aggressive and others are indolent. We're beginning to learn about this, but this just shows that this is a moving target in science, and it's how it works. And literally some of that stuff we've been learning about in the last few months or years. So it's very new. If you were to give some advice, Erin, to newly diagnosed patients, and you can, any just patient, paraphia, whatever, or SDH patients in particular, what would you say to them now? Or maybe what would you say to yourself going back in time at 16 or 17? What would you tell yourself?
Well, one of the biggest things that was a pick-me-up was always helping others and connecting with others that have what I have. It's a worldwide disease. Doesn't matter what ethnic background you are, doesn't matter what age you are, doesn't matter what size you are. It hits everybody no matter what. It's just the roll of the dice at that point. And for me, connecting with people all around the world, and hearing their stories and being able to, like, when you meet them in real life and saying you're my family because you have that connection, you've been through this path with somebody, even if it was a completely different story, you have that connecting all the emotions that you felt throughout the journey. So my thing is, when I find like I'm struggling with something, I go right to the boards, I go right to patient advocacy, and I just connect with people again. And that's the fuel, finding your fuel to keep moving on. And I think I tried to do that from the start because I was really frustrated that there was no information out there that was easy to understand for a teenager. And back then, internet was really new. And so getting all that onto like an online forum and having somebody talk about it, that was always my driving goal. And now it's just finding, redirecting people to the right channels and saying, hey, you're new to iDose, go over here. There's a ton of information for you. And not being afraid to say, I don't know what that means. And then having either someone explain what it means or looking it up or writing it down for your doctor. I mean, it's having those tools is a big difference. And that's what I would advise anybody.
And I'll say it again, yes, that's true. But the folks on this panel are some of those people who are actually helping disseminate that information. And thank you for doing that, because, you have all this information out there. It's funny, like I joke with people, the internet, we used to say, well, the problem was we didn't have access to information. It turns out that wasn't the problem, guys. It was finding out what information is correct and accurate. And now we have folks who can actually help you talk through this information. So I wish you guys could see the chat, because what's blowing up here is how awesome you all are. Okay, which we did already. But people saying that you're inspiring and your story is giving hope. And like I said in the beginning, that's what we wanted. So it's working. That you're the ultimate advocate. We have a couple of questions though. But let me try to answer them. This first one is really more towards John and Dr. Mo. It says, thank you all for your testimonies. I want to know, how do you cope with severe side effects of Gleevec, namely severe rashes and constant itching? There are other side effects too. That's what they're asking about. But how do you deal with side effects with your medications?
I'll jump in there. I haven't had the rashes for a long time. The side effects, most of them have gotten better for me over time. I do still struggle with insomnia and the muscle cramps and bone pain. And if you haven't tried this product, I had this on my desk for a reason.
So we can see the label. Yep.
There we go.
Pickle juice.
Pickle juice, but it has electrolytes in it. I get it on Amazon. I tried so many things. I've had to pull my car over because of cramps. I've awakened in the night because of really bad cramps, even when I'm hydrated and in heat. That of all the things I've found to help me with this journey is that product. They should really pay me for as much as I promote that product.
The pickles too,
and then
they're tasty also. Yes.
Yeah, I find that being hydrated, getting enough rest, minimizing stress, even things that are physical, our mindset can impact what goes on with us physiologically. And I'm real big on, not overextending myself. I want to have fun and balance. And you think, well, I just need a cream, I just need a pill. But sometimes you just need rest and peace of mind so that your body can do what it naturally does. We, as healthcare providers, we create an environment for healing. Your body heals. The pills don't do it. The injections don't do it. Your body actually does the healing. So you need to give your body every resource, every opportunity to work on your behalf. But that helps me a lot, and staying hydrated are really, really helpful to me. John may have experience with the rashes, the fatigue. Just when you're tired, just shut it down.
Yep.
Yeah. I haven't had, I've had a constant rash for 20 something years. It doesn't bother me. It's just around my neck. It's just there. It doesn't itch. So I don't have that one. My biggest side effects, of course, were severe cramping in my hands. It cost me my profession. You didn't want me giving an injection or having a drill in your mouth if I could cramp up. And it's funny because you tell somebody you get cramps, which I really don't do much anymore. And they go, oh, I get cramps too. I know it. No, you don't. This is more of a tetany. If you were to try to knead my fingers, you'd break my fingers. And before I was forced to retire, I tried everything, nothing worked. Since then, I know that I cramp when I'm very physical, when I'm doing a lot, either with my hands or my feet, that creates it. If I'm playing tennis and I'm holding a racket, I know I'm going to cramp. Certain things after boxing or whatever. But to me, there's a risk reward. And my reward is much greater than the risk for that. So I do what I do. The two things that I found best in the last few years, I've actually had really good success with acupuncture and cramp to my hands. And I recently discovered pickle juice as well. Only I read a study that it's not the pickle juice itself And it's not necessarily the electrolytes, but it's sort of the noxiousness of pickle juice that does something with your central nervous system that actually knocks out the cramps. That's as much as I can explain it, but you can go on and I will tell you that's also worked for me. And I know people that sleep with ivory soap under their legs at night, and this, that, and the other. Whatever works,
Wow.
It doesn't matter. Whatever works. And the second thing, like most people, is my fatigue, especially at the end of my career, was getting really, really severe. I asked my brother one day, I said, this fatigue is just awful. I said, I played tennis this morning, golf in the afternoon, and cards at night. And he said, John, you should be dead, not just tired. So when it comes to fatigue, if I'm home, I take a nap. That's just part of my new normal. If I'm not, I power through it and it goes away. Just keep on keeping on. That's kind of what I do.
One thing I'll add is, these are good ways to, especially when you talk about skin issues and stuff like that. However, it also is not a bad idea to mention these issues to your physician, because it could be something, there could be another medication that's countering, and always be careful of that. Also want to mention that the pickle juice people have not paid us any money for this, but if they're listening, we're interested. So, come on, come our way. The other question that comes up, and this is for any of you. So we talk about side effects, and usually we're often focusing on the physical side effects, rash, itches, fatigue, diarrhea is common. But there are non-physical side effects, emotional side effects that come from a cancer diagnosis. And you get to talk about this only as comfortable as you are. The question says, how do you deal with your emotional side effects? And in particular, what do you think about antidepressants to cope with the emotional side effects of a cancer diagnosis? So anyone who wants to take that one, go right ahead.
I can do that. Dealing with pheochromocytoma, they call it the rage tumor, but it's actually the emotion tumor times 10 or 20, depending, how much adrenaline you have in your system. It's an emotional roller coaster ride, pretty much. So I had to learn from a young age how to deal with a lot of emotions and mental health tools and tricks and trades. I did go to a therapist at one point in the early stages. They didn't want to put me on any more medications at that time, just because I was on a cocktail of medications just to keep my blood pressure down. So I actually learned how to either distance myself from things that were making me emotional, or just recognizing why I was reacting to something the way I was reacting, and asking that question, and then either refocusing or having a plan to solve what was causing the emotional turmoil. Or but the one thing that they were telling me over and over again is it's okay to be on those types of medications too, if your doctor says it's safe for you to be on them. It's a tool. It is if it's needed for you, it is right for you. And then finding that doctor to be able to give it to you. So don't feel guilt that you have to use it when somebody doesn't. That doesn't mean you're not any less stronger than the next person next to you that's not taking them. It's just you need a little extra boost, or somebody else needs something else for a mental switch. So that would be my advice, is if somebody is telling you that you kind of need something to pick you up, use it, because that's going to make you stronger in the long run to fight the longer battle, which is getting over the cancer and fighting and winning it. So that's my 2 cents at least.
Don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. That's good.
Exactly.
And I will tell you that idea of distancing yourself from things and understanding why, I don't care if you're a cancer patient or anyone else, that is really good advice. Just in general, if something's bothering you, you probably want to ask yourself, why is it causing me to feel that way? But if you need help, get it. Dr. Mo or John, do you have anything you want to add on that point?
I'm just a big fan of counseling in addition to whatever pharmaceuticals your healthcare provider feels is effective. This is something that we have to deal with our entire lives. And at some point, I mean, you want to keep talking about it, but you've kind of worn the people out around you talking about it. And I think it's good to have an objective professional person to help you through, because it's really up and down. I mean, it's going on 10 years for me, and it's up and down. They're really good times. And then there are times, particularly in 2020, when a lot of things were going on in the world. There were a lot of crises. that I had to process in addition to my own health issues, not being able to see my doctor. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to do telemedicine? You always mash on me to feel, for tumor growth. You mean to tell me you didn't need to be mashing on me all these years? Now we're going to go to telemedicine. I was like, I need to speak with HR. Something is going on here. So I do believe in it. And I've been through some deaths, some tragedies in my family, and I will reach out to mental health professionals. We reach out to professionals for every other part of our body. So I'm big on that.
Okay, John, is there anything you want to add to that?
I have hopefully a quick little story about that. After my first cancer, and I was in the locker room, and I saw a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, and he asked me how I was doing, and I said, great. And he looked at me like I was sort of nuts. And I said, nobody ever gave me a death sentence. And he turned to me and he said, John, you have a good, healthy sense of denial. And I went, that's baloney. I haven't denied anything. I've done everything they've wanted me to do. And I went home and looked up the definition. And yes, I have what they call a pretty healthy male sense of denial, which is we don't see things in black and white like many women do. And it's much harder if you see things in black and white. There's much more emotion to it. Me, like I said before, I think I was just born with rose-colored glasses on. And that's a blessing as far, it is who I am. And I sort of take things as they come, but I also recognize, especially after he said that, what that meant to me. I think anyone that needs help should see a physician, should see somebody that could help them. That's just it's just, you're treating any other part of your body. If you need to see a psychologist or somebody that would help you, that's like treating anything else in your body, and it should be done.
Excellent. So we don't have time for all the questions. The one person in the chat who said, does anyone have a lot of dizziness and diarrhea as a side effect? I will point out those are two of the most common side effects for Gleevec and GIST. So the answer is many patients have that. Let me also just take this opportunity to thank the participants. You guys are amazing. Your stories are amazing. I was going to say, I hope people have learned, and taken something away from this presentation, but looking at the chat, it's not a hope, that's reality. It happened. I also want to mention that if you come up with other questions afterwards and you want to send them, again, you can send them to LifeRaft, LIFERAFT, at liferaftgroup.org, and we'll do our best to answer them. We can pass them on to the folks. And I don't know about you guys, but I enjoyed this. I learned a lot, and I think it was useful, and I'd love to do it again. So if people have stories that they think want to be told, and I know they do, okay, just reach out to us, reach out to Mary or Carol in our communications department. Here's a plug, read the newsletter. Their emails are on it. Okay, so there you go. And get us your stories, and maybe you'll be in one of these. It definitely is something worth doing, and we're very happy to have access to patients who are willing to give us their time and do it. So on that note, if everyone, I don't know if we just wave, cyberspace, but
thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing it. And everybody have a great rest of your afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.